Welcome back to Bible Essentials. My name is Sarah Ruff. We are reading Daniel chapter 3. Last week in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was and the interpretation of his dream. And his dream was the kingdoms that were going to rule after him, the inferior kingdom that would rule after him, that there would be other kingdoms, and then this final kingdom made up of these 10 kings that would be a divided kingdom, and then Christ was going to come and strike that kingdom, and all that whole statue, all those kingdoms would become like chaff blown away in the wind, and Christ would set up his kingdom on earth. And so the question was asked, what does the most powerful man in the world, who is the King of Kings, who's the head of gold, what does he do when he's told an inferior king is going to take his place? Well, chapter 3, verse 1 is going to tell us. It says this: King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. There you have it. He's making a gold statue, all gold statue. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King of Babylon had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So this gold statue, 90 feet high, is for worship. And so the herald says, when you hear the music, you are to fall down on your face and worship this gold statue. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and other kinds of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshipped the gold statue the King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some of the Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You, as king, have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews who you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." So the three friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are ruling, remember, in the province of Babylon, and all the leaders were called to worship this gold statue, but they do not fall down and worship. Let me remind you, there were other Israelite boys, other little Jewish boys that had been taken to Babylonian captivity, who did worship. It was just these three. And you say, well, where was Daniel during this scenario? Well, Daniel was actually in the court of the king. And so they were in the province. And just a little heads up to give you some little insight in this. One of the main things that nations would do when they would take over another nation, or they would conquer another nation, they would assimilate them. They would require them to worship their gods and to be like them. And so if you were going to unify a nation, then you would unify them by all worshiping one God. And so that's exactly what King Nebuchadnezzar is doing here, is trying to unify his kingdom by worshiping one God. All right, let's continue reading then. It says, "Then, in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue from my power?'" So he's given them another chance. He goes, "Okay, listen, I'm going to give you another chance. When you hear the music, fall down and worship. If not, then you're going to be thrown into the blazing fire. And what God's going to save you from that?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Wow. What souls of steel here that they have. To the king's face, "We will not worship your gods, even if our God, who can rescue us, but even if he chooses not to, we are not going to bow down to your gods, King Nebuchadnezzar." Verse 19, "Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary, and he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, in their trousers, robes, and coverings, and their clothes, were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire." Verse 24, Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" "Yes, of course, your majesty," they replied to the king. He exclaimed, "Look! I see 4 men not tied walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of the blazing fire and called, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satrap prefects and governors and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their head was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no even smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this." Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. All right. We hear this story all the time as kids, and we are going to find out later in Daniel, in the last couple chapters of Daniel, why we're told this story about these 3 Jewish men who just would not bow or bend to any foreign god, and that was willing to die on behalf of their God. Why are we told this story? What's it for? Well, again, you're going to find out later on in the book of Daniel. All right, I think chapter 3 is very just a good, I don't think it's hard to understand. King Nebuchadnezzar, he's told in chapter 2 that an inferior kingdom is going to take his place. So King Nebuchadnezzar in this fear is trying to change the outcome. He's like, if I can unify every one of my people so no inferior king and kingdom can rise up to take my place, if we're all worshiping the same God, if I can unify them, maybe I can keep this from happening. Well, you will find out in Daniel chapter 4, it is not the case. In fact, God tells him just the opposite. I'll see you next Thursday.